Good morning and welcome back to Hemp Homeschool. This is Katie at Kentucky Hemp Works, and I'm very excited to be here for lesson 21 of our Hemp Homeschool series. We have been doing this for several weeks now, and last week we talked about the history of hemp and how it went through the planet, it spread across the globe, and eventually came to the United States. And how for really more than 10,000 years, hemp was a major industry for cultures and civilizations all over the globe. But then, as time went on and it got to the United States and it became sort of a threat to some of the powers that be, hemp was demonized, and governments used fear tactics and racism and all kinds of horrible techniques to demonize the plant and turn our farmers into criminals almost overnight. So we talked about that period of prohibition and how for a long time in our country hemp was illegal, and that over time states started to push back against those prohibitions and the drug war, and they started to legalize it for different purposes, whether that was for medical marijuana or even recreational or free market use, or finally, as in the case of Kentucky, legalizing it for industrial hemp purposes. So Thursday, on the last lesson, we talked about how we actually kind of went through the process here in Kentucky, specifically, just our state. And by the time I finished that lesson, it was already a good 30 minutes maybe, and probably time to wrap things up. So I thought that I would touch on the last eight or so years of hemp here in Kentucky, and what the current state of the hemp industry is. What's going on now that we've legalized it, now that we've brought it back to Kentucky farmers, now that we have processors that are processing it, manufacturers who are manufacturing it into different products and selling those to the retail markets. So when I finished up on Thursday, we had just legalized hemp. We started growing it, and I talked about, some of the trials that we went through to actually get our seed here, and battling with the DEA, which is always one of my favorite stories. And then eventually just actually planting it, growing it, and building this industry from nothing, from the ground up. So to start back from the kind of the beginning of that process, in the first year there was only a handful of groups or individuals that were growing hemp. That was 2014, and in 2014 there was several universities that planted hemp immediately for research. Started researching from the get-go. They hit the ground running. I remember some of the interesting things that they learned. I think one of the things they learned was not to plant them too deep. If you plant the seeds more than an eighth of an inch or a quarter inch deep, it'll take a lot longer for them to emerge. And so the university was wondering why it had been weeks before these seeds popped up. So a lot of little things like that, and we were starting from complete scratch, because for the last 80 years prior to this, the education, the growing practices, the methods, those were just completely ignored. They still existed. In fact, there's old pamphlets from 4-H groups that actually educate young children on the proper methods for plowing and tilling and planting hemp, and how to keep the birds from eating your seeds and all that stuff. Even fertilizing and watering that hemp, and those were geared toward children. So we think about how people viewed this plant back in the 40s and the 30s compared to how they viewed it after Prohibition. So at any rate, the universities grew some, and then a handful of private farmers were able to grow, and I was one of those. I got to team up with some local farmers here in Christian County, one in South Christian and one in North Christian, where we have very different soil types and different climates and different challenges on either end of the county. So we actually, you know, just as far as our crop, we grew about 1.5 acres, and I won't go too far into that. We talked about that in another lesson, but at any rate, it was a handful of different processors or people who were interested in processing, and we saw quite a few groups or individuals coming even from other states to Kentucky to pursue this industry here. And that was really just a product of being first, and, you know, the first one to legalize it. You know, folks saw that as an opportunity, and they came here and started investing in the state, or you know, looking for investors, looking for grants and opportunities and things like that. So over the next couple of years, everything just continued to increase. So in the second year, we had a huge jump in the number of people who were growing hemp. And for us in particular, we went from growing 1.5 acres with local farmers to growing 100 acres with a local farmer, Kendall, who we're still working with. And we saw that sort of exponential growth all across the state. It wasn't just us. It wasn't just a handful of people. It was becoming a little more mainstream. Farmers were curious. We have a lot of tobacco farmers here who were interested in finding a replacement crop for tobacco. As our grower says quite often, tobacco is soon going the way of the buffalo. It'll get to the point where regulations and laws and taxes and demonizing tobacco will push tobacco into, you know, push it out and push it out of our agricultural practices. So there's a lot of farmers that have grown tobacco here in Kentucky, and a lot who used to, who got out of it years ago for whatever reason, and who were looking for something else to try, some kind of experimental crop. So we saw huge increases in the number of people that were interested, and by the third year and the fourth year, I mean, that interest had really skyrocketed. And what we typically saw was a lot of people interested in growing it because they saw sort of a financial gold rush, you know, a green gold rush that was going to make them a bunch of money off of some land that they had in the family, or maybe some additional acreage that they didn't plan on putting in rotation or something like that. But what really ended up happening was a major bottleneck in the processing part of the supply chain. So we had lots and lots of people interested in growing, farmers with lots of experience. We had brand new farmers who'd never grown anything but were wanting to get back to the soil, wanting to get back to the land, wanting to start their journey into agriculture or self-sufficiency. We also saw processors and manufacturers, some of whom were already doing some processing and manufacturing and just sort of pivoted their business model to incorporate hemp. But we also saw brand new manufacturers and brand new processors who had never before been in manufacturing or even processing. I will say, and I'll say it with pride, that Kentucky Hemp Works was definitely one of those that had never really been in processing of any food products before, but with, you know, time and learning and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, we eventually developed into a really amazing little shop, a commercial kitchen, FDA inspected, that we're really, really proud of. So so that is, you know, that actually is something I want to touch on a little bit more, because what we're seeing in the last few years of the hemp industry is that there's so much interest in growing it, but then there's not enough people buying it. So that's kind of where we are in the industry now. I'm going to speak to that a little bit, and I want to give maybe some advice and some tips for anybody that's really interested in growing hemp, either in Kentucky or anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. Um, but we've seen a lot of problems that have arisen from too much government regulation, too much kind of control over who sells what and who grows what and what you're allowed to sell to other people and this, that, and the other. And all of those things are kind of work together to create those challenges and those bottlenecks in this industry. What we've seen, sort of before I go into tips and what's going on right now, I should probably backtrack a little bit to what's gone on in regards to government relations or government regulations over those same last few years. We saw in the very first year there really wasn't any regulations. We just kind of planted, and if we needed to, we'd ask for forgiveness later. But in 2015, we ended up having very strict regulations. If you were going to plant something, you had to give 2 weeks notice. If you were going to move something, you had to give 2 weeks notice. If you were going to harvest something, or you needed a test, or this, that, and the other, it was constantly letting the government know, hey, here's what we're going to do. And it got to the point where it was a joke, well, if you're going to fart in the field, you have to give them 2 weeks notice because, you don't want to do anything without permission, right? So really it became very, very challenging for farmers to find markets on their own. It became challenging for processors to find markets to sell to, the end consumer, or even to wholesalers or retailers. And all of these challenges were face down, like they were, the processors and manufacturers saw those challenges and they rose above those challenges, and they managed to get around those challenges, and they faced them down and said, you know what, we're going to do it this way. We're going to figure out a way to get around it. We're going to figure out how to make this work. But all of those things, it takes you 10 times as long to get anywhere. It takes you 10 times as long to grow as a business. It takes you 10 times as long to hire new people when you're spending so much time and energy and money trying to figure out ways around, government regulations, or how to make your business work with regulations. So it is difficult, and of course, some regulation is a good thing, but I think that a lot of those regulations should be coming from the people who are experiencing it. We're experiencing this every day. We know what it's like to start a manufacturing facility, to go through the steps of hemp farming, and how to, the challenges of farming when it's raining one day and then it's a drought the next 6 weeks, and all these things. All of these things, you can't plan for them. You can't put it in a regulation. If this happens, then you need to do this, when you don't know what the universe is going to hand you. So regulations create a lot more challenges in this industry. And over the years, though, we had been able to work with the state government and get them to scale back on those regulations a little bit at a time and a little bit at a time. And over the years, we've had a lot of little victories, little successes where we, had a certain regulation and now it was changed. Or, maybe there was a particular law that was making things challenging for hemp processors, and so we needed to change that. So we've done a lot of really great improvements to the industry and to the regulations for our state specifically. However, we still have some challenges, and we have challenges bringing product to the market because of some of these regulations. So I will get into a little bit on the current current events, what's going on right now in the industry, and then the tips and things like that, because we have a lot of interest. We get phone calls all the time from people that are interested in growing hemp. They're interested in seed, they're interested in clones, they're interested in finding someone to buy their crop for them from the previous year. We try to help out as many people as we can, but there are a few things that I always try to encourage people to do. For one thing, from the very beginning, I always try to encourage people to find a market for your product before you even plant it. That is one of the key rules to farming in general. You know, even if you are trying an experimental crop like sorghum and you've never tried it before, you don't want to plant sorghum until you have a processor who's planning on buying it from you. So you want to line those things up in advance, and that way you aren't stuck at the end of the harvest season trying to figure out where you're going to sell it, which is a major challenge that hemp farmers are faced with right now. Right now, there's hemp all over the state just waiting to be sold. And part of that problem is unscrupulous processors who overpromise things and promise they're going to make these farmers rich, and then they disappear at the last minute right before harvest time, and then the farmers are left holding the bag. But it's not always the case. You know, sometimes people just want to try it and want to get their feet wet, but they're still not finding that market before they plant. So finding a market before you plant is very important. And it's something that farmers typically do even with common crops like corn and soybeans. Like, you don't plant it unless you know what you're going to do with it. So, so that kind of brings me to my next point is who do you sell it to? Well, the Department of Agriculture can't really help you there. There's not a whole lot of help out there for helping people find buyers for these crops. It really is on the farmer to find that buyer, to develop a relationship with the buyer, and you know, hopefully to build something together that can snowball and get bigger and more wonderful, which is what we've done here. You know, we started very small. We didn't get ahead of ourselves. We didn't go into a bunch of debt to try to buy a bunch of equipment right away. We just started small with what we had. Kendall grew a crop that we thought that we could manage, and he was successful in growing that crop, and little by little by little we've improved everything, and now we're a pretty awesome little business. But what's important is we are processing the hemp seeds, and then we're manufacturing that seed into a finished product. We are that connection, that link in the chain that is so important. And that is that link that brings the farmer's crop to the end consumer. And that link, that's where we're missing out. So when people contact me and they ask me, you know, my thoughts on growing hemp or for advice or tips, one of the first things that I tell them is, you know, if you don't already have somebody lined up to buy your crop, figure out how you can take your crop to market on your own. How can you, using the skills that you've developed over your life, use those skills and that knowledge and the education that you've earned through your life, use those things to figure out how to incorporate hemp into that. So, you know, maybe it has nothing to do with farming or processing. Maybe your skills are in marketing and advertising and web development, and because you have an interest in industrial hemp, you can use those skills and those talents to help the hemp industry to sell more product, to buy more product from farmers, and to keep that cycle and that economy going. Maybe your skill set is in construction materials, or some of the accessories and the things that go along with construction materials, like barriers for water and for dirt and things like that. You know, figure out how can you incorporate hemp into something that you already do. Well, we know hemp can be used for building materials, so if you're an expert in that field and you've got decades of experience, why not spend a little bit of time learning how to pivot into a new industry and kind of, you know, at this point, you're almost cornering the market, really, right now. I can't think of more than one person off the top of my head who is currently building with hemp construction materials and meeting those zoning requirements and meeting those codes that are required for electrical and plumbing and things like that within that building. You know, I can think of one person out of everybody I know in the country or everybody I've heard of who's actually using their experience in construction to build with hemp. So these are the kinds of things, there are so many opportunities out there, but everybody is focused very kind of like this laser focus on the growing. Well, I'm just going to make a bunch of money growing this hemp, and then I'm going to sell it, and it's going to be easy peasy. It's not easy. It's not a quick thing. It is difficult to grow, and it's difficult to market. It's got challenges with processing. It's got challenges with manufacturing. So these are things that we need experience from all over the country. What I would love to see personally is a very grassroots cottage type industry with regards to hemp. We are already working really hard towards building that sort of cottage industry. But instead of just having one Kentucky Hemp Works here where you get your hemp seed oil and then we ship it to Wisconsin and we ship it to South Dakota and we ship it to California, why not have local processors all over the country doing the same thing and selling to their local communities? Now, I'm not gonna lie, like, we're happy to ship anything to anywhere in the world that we're allowed to ship it to. We would love to take all that effort out of the picture for you so that you can just get the finished product. But what I would love to see, really in my heart, is that I would love to see competition all over the United States. I would love to see people doing their own version of Kentucky Hemp Works and breaking that crop down into raw materials for other people to use. Because when you spread that knowledge around, you spread that that experience and raw materials and let everybody do what they do best, that's how the grassroots can be one of the most beautiful ways to spread positivity, to spread good health, to really to change the world. Like, this is how we could physically change the world. Get people using their skill set, using their knowledge and experience to make things that they're good at making. I often use the example of the soap makers that we sell to. So we sell hemp seed oil to soap makers, and we also sell some of our exfoliating scrub to them to mix into the soap. But I don't know how to make soap. I don't know the first thing about making soap. I mean, I read about it. I even borrowed a book on it, thought I might try it, but it's time consuming, and it would take me forever to learn how to do it. So why not just crush seed oil, which I know how to do, and send that seed oil to soap manufacturers and let them do what they do best? And then instead of having a Kentucky Hemp Works brand soap that may or may not be any good because we don't know what we're doing, we have 15 different soap manufacturers all made with Kentucky Hemp Works soap. So why not do that? Why not repeat that all across the country and let that be a sort of pioneer into new industries? So that's kind of where we are right now. We're currently sitting in this kind of bottleneck where we have a lot of farmers, we have a lot of interest in growing hemp, but we're lacking in processing for several reasons. Some processors, we have a lot of really wonderful small processors in Kentucky. Most of them are local to their area. Most of them are just making do with what they can afford, as opposed to going a couple $1 million into debt and then trying to figure out how to dig themselves out of it. They're just doing what they can with what they have, and little by little they're growing and they're hiring and they're doing more. They're improving their processes. But it's only, it's only a pretty small group of small processors. We also have a couple of big processors, some of which are doing really well, who are very transparent and open about their practices. And we've also seen a lot of processors, unfortunately, that just kind of pooped out, and for whatever reason, maybe it was an accident, maybe it was just laziness, or whatever the issue was. They couldn't keep up with their debt, and they took off and left the farmers holding the bag. So, we've even seen it, so as far as, farmers who are suing processors because they promised to pay them and then they bailed out, or they sold their business, and then the person they sold the business to bailed out on the farmers. So It's tough. It's really tough in this industry right now, but I don't think that should be something that turns you off from following your dreams. We're following our dreams. Yes, it's tough. Yes, we have an industry where we can get our credit card processing shut down overnight. We can get kicked off of PayPal, which we've done. Every single one of us, both business and personal accounts, have been shut down on PayPal. We've had YouTube videos taken down that were educational videos that had, the governor's office of ag policy and the Department of Agriculture interviews in the video, and then YouTube takes it down and says it goes against their community standards. Like, we've got educators and government officials, and they're saying it's against their community standards. Facebook doesn't really want to work with us. They kind of toss us a bone every once in a while, and they did take our page down at one time on Christmas. That was a great surprise. But all of these challenges doesn't mean that it's not worth trying. And if you have a particular skill set, you have a particular set of talents that you can utilize in the hemp industry, maybe your talent is growing. And that's wonderful. We need good quality, wonderful growers, but we also need, people who want to innovate in other areas as well. So, I had a couple of questions. I think I'll kind of wrap up my little pep rally there. But that's kind of where we are right now in the industry, and we have some challenges still that we'd like to fix. And some of those challenges actually had to do with some of the questions that were sent in, so I'm going to try to address those and kind of wrap things up here. But one of the questions that we had was about using hemp for microgreens, and so the question was, asking about hemp microgreens, how do we go about getting seeds and then, growing those, sprouting them for microgreens. So I can address that for Kentucky, and then I can kind of spread that and explain how it works in other states. So in Kentucky right now, it is currently illegal by way of regulation to sell any hemp flower material, any of the leaf material, or any viable seeds. And viable seeds means seeds that can be planted. So if I sterilize the seed, then I can't plant it anymore. So if I cook it or bake it or hit it with a chemical somehow to make it sterile, that's a sterile seed. A viable seed is a living seed that can grow. So viable seed in Kentucky is illegal. Floral material in Kentucky is illegal. And so that kind of puts a little damper on both getting seeds for microgreens, unless you want to get a permit, which is great. But, then you have to go through the whole permitting process and pay $500 and go through all the paperwork to just sprout microgreens. But then once they're sprouted and those true leaves are actually present, and you want to sell those or use them in smoothies or add them to salads for your restaurant, whatever the case may be, that at that point it's illegal in Kentucky and can't be done. So do we have another question?
I have a further question on that. So where could a licensed grower potentially buy them? They couldn't?
Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some good places to get seed if you were a licensed grower and you were living in a state. And that's kind of what I meant. My answer there was specific for Kentucky. In other states like Indiana, pretty much all of them except for Kentucky, you can actually sell those things. So it would not be a problem in those places. And of course, you would have to check out the laws and the regulations in your state to find out if it's legal. But if you are interested in seed, there are options out there. Personally, we have purchased seed for planting seed crops from Canada and from here in the United States, and I'll mention those. But there are different types of seeds, so I feel like I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I want to make sure you understand the differences in seed and the price differences in seed. So if you're buying a CBD crop seeds, you're buying feminized seed from, Jupiter Seed or any of these seed producers out in Colorado or some of these western states, you're buying seed from them, you might pay $1 or $2 a seed, or maybe they'll give you a bundle pack or something, where you're looking at a very expensive pound of seeds right there. But if you're looking at seed for a seed crop, it's got little to no CBD in there, it's really grown just to get pollinated and produce more seeds, you're looking at anywhere from $3 to $5 a pound. So we have gotten seed from Canada, from some of our Canadian growers up there, but we prefer to work with Legacy Hemp out of Minnesota and Wisconsin. Legacy Hemp, I've dropped their name several times. We've been working with them since 2014. Ken at Legacy Hemp was the party that got me started on the whole DEA hijacking issue. So thanks, Ken, for being awesome and always coming through and doing what you say you're gonna do. So yeah, I mean, Legacy Hemp would be a good one. Aside from that, I mean, it's really just searching. There are places up in Canada. I prefer to work with the people I've developed relationships with here, though. Did we have another question?
The final question from Michael, because you covered what hope is there to sell CBD floral material in stock from last year's crop?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, the other question that we had before this video was, what is the chance of actually selling floral material here in Kentucky? We're not at that point yet. It's still illegal, as I did mention. But I think that those things will change. The rule of law still exists in this country, and I think we're going to see some changes there.
And then the last one from Michael was, how does hemp oil assist those recovering from COVID?
Okay, the COVID. I've heard a lot of people asking about using CBD oil for COVID. And honestly, it's something that we wondered at first, and we've talked about it amongst ourselves. We don't really promote that kind of information, but one of the most important things to remember is that disease is something that is around us all the time. We are constantly surrounded by diseases. There are pests, there are fungus and mildew and mold and viruses and bacteria, and these things all around us every single day. They are in our body, they're on our skin, they're in our hair, they're in our eyebrows. Every part of the universe around us is contaminated with something. So the best thing that you can do, I can't say that CBD is going to help with COVID or that CBD is not going to help with COVID. I don't have those answers. I think that at some point we should have some of our stellar educators and researchers in this country look into that information. But until we have that research and those tests and that actual true experimentation, we can't really justify saying yes, it'll help, or no, it won't help. And of course, the bottom line is I can't give medical advice, I can't make medical claims anyway. But what I can do is encourage everybody to take the best possible care of your body that you can. And some of the things that we are not getting in this country are proper nutrition and proper education about the foods that we're eating. So we really do think that taking care of yourself and providing, like for example, for our CBD drops, we use hemp seed oil and CBD extract. So you're not just getting the CBD, you're also getting all those omega fatty acids, all those different amino acids, and what's called the essential fatty acids, which are the fatty acids that we have to get from our food because we don't produce them ourselves. So there are tons of ways that you can help to better prepare your body to fend off any kind of disease, and those include getting the right nutrients, the minerals and vitamins and the amino acids and the proteins and the carbs and things from your food that your body needs to fight off disease, fend off any kind of attacks, and come back from something that could potentially be life-threatening or crippling or extremely dangerous to your health. So while we can't make any specific answer or medical claims, I do think that it's important to always use the best food you can. Grow your own food if possible. Probably the healthiest way to eat is to pick it and eat it immediately. And those are concepts and things that I think that one of the good things about this coronavirus is that there are more people planting gardens this year than probably ever before, or at least, in the last 50 years. There are more people looking at ways to keep their immune system strong and to keep themselves healthy and their families healthy than ever before. There are more people connecting with their children and staying home and enjoying time with their families and becoming more at peace with each other, even with all the craziness going on in the world and the division and everything else. So keep that in mind. Hopefully some of our yoga series will help with that, with that sort of, letting the anxieties go, promoting good eating and good health and a positive mindset. So that's about all I have for today. Just to remind everybody, if you stuck with me this long, don't forget about our Mother's Day giveaway, and keep an eye out for the winner of that giveaway on Thursday after Hemp Homeschool. We are very excited. Got a lot of women who work here, a lot of moms, fur baby moms even. So we are really looking forward to this weekend. And that's it. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.